He's still at large, yes. He was the ultimate whale.
What do you mean by whale?
In nightclubs and casinos, it's a code name for big spenders. But we define whales by three things. They're ultra-wealthy, powerful, and operate under the radar. Understanding who these people are will open your eyes.
Listener, you have reached a number that has been disconnected.
Money, power, corruption. At Whale Hunting, we write the real rich list, exposing those who exist in the shadows. Whale Hunting is a newsletter for people who want to know how the world really works. Join the hunt. Subscribe now at whalehunting.projectbrazen.com.
This episode contains references to suicide. In a cramped, dark loft in Williamsburg, New York, a sour smell seeps through the narrow halls. On each wall is an array of pencil drawings framed in black and hung precisely. Delicate graphic sketches spun with the precision of a spider web, strung out silk-thin lines connecting a network of circles. But no personal photographs, no color. The apartment is bare other than the rolls of parchment paper leaning against corners, ripped out sketchbook pages and piles upon piles of books. There's a chill in the air, an otherworldly heaviness swaying over the space, because in the living room, a single shaft of light tells us everything we need to know, the tragedy before us. There's someone here. A man. At first, only his hand is visible. A worker's hand, nails bitten down, dirt lining each one. The hand of a creator. He wears a navy blue suit, well tended to, recently dry cleaned. And in his front breast pocket, a bottle of Tylenol, open.
Mark, I'm trying to get a hold of you, and your mother's trying to get a hold of you.
The man is dressed for an important occasion, so important that, in fact, it's his own death. One day before his birthday.
And if you don't call me back, I'm going to call the police.
It's too late, and the police officer on duty, Officer Michael Hendricks, is first on the scene following a distress call from Hillary Ann Maslin, the man's girlfriend.
She was just concerned that she hadn't heard from him. So when I got there, the music was playing. The radio was on, so I thought he was home. Once I looked through and saw him hanging.
The weight of his body creaks from a sprinkler pipe. Scattered on the floor beneath him are several hundred more Tylenol pills. But stranger still is what dangles beside him.
He hung a bottle. I think it was champagne. I don't remember. It was a large bottle, but it was also hanging next to him. Hanging, like you would hang it yourself, he hung the bottle.
48-year-old Mark Lombardi, father, lover, and artist. A man at the cusp of international success for his intricate line drawings that walked a tightrope between art and information. A man who shone an unwelcome light on the power brokers of the world. A man who was at once conceptual artist and investigative reporter. One of a kind.
Mark drew pictures about money and politics, provocative pictures, even incriminating pictures.
Connections that were unbelievably telling.
Brilliant in his own unique way.
Something was very wrong with this case.
He handed me a bunch of micro cassettes.
A tale of fraud, corruption, and international intrigue.
These conspiracy theorists are morons.
How did they know who did this like they did Lee Harvey Oswald?
Where the money for 9/11 came from, etc., etc.
He's sort of below the main radar of contemporary art.
Mark Lombardi.
Tragic in his own unique way.
I wanted to tell a detailed story, a story perhaps that had some dark passages to it.
This is the journey of his life, and how he rose from humble beginnings, a researcher and archivist, to the artist who left behind a legacy, a story yet untold, trailblazing a path for whistleblowers to challenge individuals in control of politics and finance.
They asked me how old he was, and then they said, go home, we'll call you later. And I remember at that point that I knew he was dead. I remember because I went out to a side street and I cried. I just knew he was dead.
This is The Illuminator, Art, Conspiracy, and Madness. The story of conceptual artist Mark Lombardi's rise to fame, whose brilliant genius had devastating consequences. I'm Akko Mitchell, and this is Episode 1, Angels and Devils.
Okay, Mark. Since I'm rolling the tape now, we have begun shooting your videotape.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me. Tell me about your process.
About
your
the
workings. Point out interesting things to me here in your apartment. It's a little more humble than that.
Andy Mann, Mark's good friend, a pioneer of video art, is over at Mark's apartment filming him. Mark doesn't seem to notice. He's on the floor, hunched over a parchment surrounded by stacks of books and scribbled notes.
Okay. What's up? What do you have to show?
What do I have to show?
They first meet in Houston in the late 80s, where Mark lived for decades as a struggling artist.
What do you have to show me?
Andy's among a troupe of fellow creatives who always believed in Mark before he even believed in himself.
Trace with your finger maybe a few of these connections so we can...
Okay, for instance, you had Mo Dalit.
In the sweltering heat of a New York summer, the air conditioning unit hums tirelessly in the corner of Mark's small apartment.
He goes back to the 30s. He was a partner of Lansky in bootlegging. I believe it's Cleveland.
He stubs out a cigarette and smiles up through the lens of his friend's camera. This grainy footage is among the only remaining that captures the chaotic genius of Mark Lombardi at work. A genius that everyone else in the world would learn of only after his death.
For 4 years.
Mark is handsome in his own way, a toothy grin, glasses permanently perched on his nose, a wild look in his eyes.
I was getting into information from a number of sources, which I was beginning to get confused by. I couldn't really keep the story straight.
Slim, tan, and aloof, he's popular with the ladies, but his real charm lies with his intellect. How he merged art with revealing the identities of the people who run the world, those he called the silent partners that shy away from the headlines, that are often not held accountable until now.
I was losing track of various connections that I thought were vital to the story, and simply out of sheer necessity began doing sketches of corporate organizations, hierarchies, and various political structures to keep the information all at hand. I used the drawings to refresh my memory, as, so to speak, a prompt.
Mark's brilliance is in his vision, an ability to see the world around him as a tapestry of connections. Connections the rest of us can't see.
Form a database.
He knew how to research, knew how to dig into things.
Irv Tepper is another artist friend of Mark's, drawn to the magic of Mark's mind.
From day one, you could tell he was hungry. You didn't have to talk about it. You could tell the guy was hungry, really hungry to make it. He was already, I think, in his 40s. He hadn't tasted it, and now he wanted it. That's why he worked. He was going to make it, and he was on to something.
Mark started with paint. No one talks about those pictures, even Mark. He distances himself from his early work, almost embarrassed by it.
I had to paint and wanted to paint, but I was never thoroughly satisfied with it.
Those rarely seen abstract paintings are often black and white, composed of fragmented, deconstructed letter forms. But in search of political and financial truth, he hunts for another way, a window for us all to view the corrupt world around us.
I was searching for a vehicle that would have the graphic impact of a painting, but could convey a story, narrative information. I call these narrative structures.
What he came up with was a remarkable cross between conceptual art and hard-hitting investigative journalism. In some ways, only newspaper reporters and investigators truly understood his work, and perhaps that was his greatest downfall.
He did all the drawings on the floor, and he sharpened these pencils, and he had a bunch of T-squares and triangles and French curves and all those kind of things.
And what I will do is I will use, this is called a ship's curve, and I will use these to create a flow to the drawing that, first of all, interests me.
Using a ship's curve, a stencil architects and designers use to mimic the smooth, continuous, and flowing line, like that of the hull of a ship. Mark draws meticulous, fine lines curving outward from a network of circles. His art is, in essence, an elaborate mind map. But Mark's creations are so far removed from a conventional graph, they pulsate with life. Looking at one of Mark's narrative structures, it's as if a mosaic of the world unfurls before you. A name in a circle catches your eye. A line stretches out from that name, linking it with another, and then another, illuminating incongruous connections in an eye-pleasing labyrinthine mass.
My eye wants to follow something other than all these right angles. So the image looks organic, kind of for a reason. I found that the rectilinear drawings were more difficult to read, were less pleasing on the eye than a diagram that consisted of a web of radiating lines.
Rectilinear, meaning a diagram using straight lines, never appealed to Mark.
All those right angles were slowing down the flow of the information. They were slowing down my interest.
It is this technique, applied to all manner of people and institutions, that leads him to triumph. Mark doesn't know it yet, but his years of toiling as a struggling researcher are about to come to an end. We'll be back after this short break.
We're supposed to learn from our own mistakes, but other people's errors can be instructive too. From efforts to control the weather that went disastrously awry, to the untimely death of the Segway boss, history is a treasure trove of mishaps and meltdowns that can teach us all. I'm Tim Harford, host of Cautionary Tales, the podcast that mines the greatest fiascos of the past for their most valuable lessons. Listen to Cautionary Tales wherever you get your podcasts.
Soon Mark will stumble across the information he needs to create his masterpiece, a drawing spanning over 11 feet on the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, or what Mark comes to call it, the Bank of Crooks and Criminals. His drawing would connect names as seemingly disparate as George W. Bush and Sheikh Salim bin Laden, Osama bin Laden's brother. But to Mark, everything had to make sense, accessible for the common man.
I want the information on this level to be legible, and I don't want to have to interpret it myself because there are a lot of little passages that are kind of obscure.
But it is this ability, his greatest skill, that will also lead him to his greatest danger, as his close friends would come to realize.
All the information in his artwork was public. But seeing it in the drawings is what freaked people out, because you suddenly could understand these complex networks because it was a drawing and it brought it all together, and it made it crystal clear what was going on.
He was pretty obsessed with what he was doing, wanted to tell the truth. I think that he wanted to cut through the lies and expose things.
The guy was like relentless.
Irv watched as his friend worked. Mark was always tense, his back aching, his hand in an endless cramp, forgetting Irv was even in the room.
I mean, he was in a hurry. He was in a hurry, and he wanted to get his work out there. After he started getting more and more attention, he got more and more nervous, I think, in my opinion.
Andy Feehan, another artist from Mark's Houston days, has gone over the death of his friend time and time again, but comes back to the same conclusion.
Whatever devils were driving him, his angels were driving Mark too. Whatever that manic energy was that made him work like a demon, if they had treated him psychiatrically with drugs or something, maybe that would have destroyed his motives. Some very brilliant people have been like that, you know, and it's a tragedy, but it's part of the package.
But for all of Mark's feverish intensity, for all his apparent madness and brilliance combined, the man was on to something. The truth.
He had these index cards, and he would put his sources, say, this is not conspiracy theory. Everything is based on fact-checked, published information. I'm not making any of this up. I remember he would always tell me, he's like, this is all reality.
Rafael Vargas Suarez is an up-and-coming artist when he meets Mark for the first time in 1997 in New York City.
Listening to Mark talk about the history of the Italian mob, the Colombian cartels, the CIA, and even art history, because that's actually what he studied. It was just really fascinating.
The two struck up an unlikely friendship. Raphael is half Mark's age, and among a small group of other 20-somethings who orbit the artist, compelled by the way he thinks.
First of all, what I do is survey the major published texts. We'll actually Xerox the index and then begin to pick through looking for corporate names of individuals in whom I have some kind of an interest or are already in my database.
He would go into deep detail about what his work was about, the players and characters, or as he called them, silent partners.
And I will make a card for each one and then go back to the original book and follow the index and transcribe the information that I think is relevant onto the cards, which form a database.
He didn't need much. He needed paper, pencil, and he needed a lot of time to research.
And then I'll set about sketching, doing just really doodles almost that are meant to get the story going. Start out with just smaller elements of it. Here I use a timeline. This is a pretty easy way for me to lay it out. And what it allows me to do is to plug information in. For instance, this is going to eventually stand for the Defense Ministry. This is the Agriculture Ministry. This is called the Ministry of Industrialization and Military Industrialization. And then I have another one saying Agriculture Arms.
Raphael ends up spending hours with Mark, listening to him analyze the political landscape in which we live. And he quickly realized Mark wasn't just an artist.
His art was therapeutic to how messed up he saw certain aspects of the world and of the entire political, financial, organized systems.
Mark was a visionary, progressive, and insistent on telling the truth.
Make art about things that matter. That's a conversation we always used to have, Mark and I. Stick to reality, deal with real things. So that's what he did.
It did piss him off that taxpayers had to bail out all these banks and that people would get away with untold crimes in terms of violence and coups and assassinations and this kind of crime that goes unpunished. He was angry about those things. And what did he do about it? He made art about it. He let the work speak for itself.
But Mark is hitting almost 50, and seeing young artists like Raphael makes him more desperate, hungry for success. But the closer he gets to it, as he makes strange connections about the world, the more his life deteriorates. His girlfriend Hillary notices Mark's increasingly erratic behavior.
He was super wired, and his eyes just looked dismal. At one point, a blimp was hanging outside of our window, so there was like this little sense of being, watched, maybe? I mean, he was definitely under surveillance. Mark was writing about things that people didn't want revealed.
It's just before his birthday, and Mark drops off the face of the earth. No communication. No one can reach him. Not long after, Officer Hendricks finds Mark's body. Questions linger over the artist's death.
A detective took me to his desk and he started asking me questions. I think there was some speculation that I might have been involved in his murder, in his death.
For 2 days, police interrogate his loved ones, refusing to call it a suicide, considering the strange circumstances in which he died, until an even stranger development. At the Whitney Museum of American Art, Maxwell Anderson, the museum's director, gets a call. It's the FBI. They want to know more about Mark Lombardi's work.
I said something to the effect of, we'll take that under advisement, and that was it, and can I have your number? I wasn't going to respond in real time to that. It would have been incautious.
But the FBI agent is not interested in the artist's life. They're interested in just one particular piece.
I worked to acquire the piece for the museum, the very large piece, the BCCI.
A curator of the Whitney Museum, Lawrence Render, knows the piece is powerful, but he has no idea just how potent the connections made by Mark are. How they link all the characters of a huge story.
I felt that Mark's work, and this piece in particular, the BCCI, was, it's an overused term, but I'll use it in this case, a masterpiece. It had a kind of a grand scale, for one thing. It had a very powerful, globally significant subject.
This mighty nation won't rest until we protect ourselves, our citizens, and freedom-loving people around the world.
The FBI has put America's national threat warning system on its highest alert.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
American and British forces have begun attacking the Taliban in Afghanistan tonight in a wave of military strikes.
Missile explosions light up the nighttime skies. Anti-aircraft tracers streak over the capital city, Kabul.
A year and a half after Mark's death, Osama bin Laden is held responsible for the worst terror attacks in the history of America. And Mark Lombardi had laid out the connections showing how Osama bin Laden, through his brother Salam, moved money around the world. Critical clues in how he financed the attacks.
This was not long after the September 11th attack that they came, and possibly within just like a month of it. The atmosphere in New York at that time was very, very strange and troubling. For lack of a better word, paranoid.
It's all public information.
It's all public information. I am just reprocessing it. I am rearranging it in a visual format that's meaningful to me.
Think anybody's going to come along and shoot you in the back of the skull tonight?
No, I mean, actually, I'll tell you, I have been asked that question before.
Coming up on the next episode of The Illuminator.
I was sitting in an office on the 5th floor. It was a message passed to me that an agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation had come into the museum and was requesting an opportunity to examine a work off-site.
That work was a drawing of celestial-like magnificence by Mark Lombardi. The Illuminator is a production of Brazen. It's hosted by me, Akko Mitchell. Farah Halim is the showrunner and scriptwriter. Subin Kim is the reporter and associate producer.
Megan Dean and Charlie Barlow are story editors, and Ian Chambers is senior producer, sound designer, and composer.
Claire Urbarn is the production manager. Mariangel Gonzalez is the senior producer and project manager. Ryan Ho is creative director, and Julian Pradier is the cover art designer. Additional design by Andrea Klarich. Lucy Woods is head of research, and Arnav Benaikia is fact checker. Bradley Hope and Tom Wright are executive producers. Mark Lombardi interview excerpts are sourced from the Andy Mann Video Archive, courtesy of media arts organization Aurora Picture Show. Subscribe to Brazen Plus to listen to ad-free episodes. For other amazing stories, please follow us on Instagram at brazen.fm or X at brazenfm, or go to our website, brazen.fm.